to Wayne. Wayne was one of the very original shoe clinic staff when we very first opened, and at the time was in the New Zealand mountain running team, and it's great to see you here tonight, mate. Really, really good. So I'll now hand over to Kathrine now. There we go.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Amy. Well, everybody, I'm Kathrine Switzer, and it is my pleasure to be the MC tonight, but I'm also going to do a little bit of speaking. Roger has asked me to do that. I just want to welcome all of you to this wonderful, marvelous occasion for a wonderful and marvelous book by a wonderful and marvelous man, Roger Robinson. I know I'm prejudiced, but a lot of us are friends and have known each other, but we know you, but you don't necessarily know each other. So if you don't have a friend, just turn around and say hi to somebody. You're going to have one tonight. If you're not having a good time yet, weasel your way over back to the wine stand here and have a couple of drinks, and you'll have a really, really good time. I also hope you'll be a little bit inspired because we have some very interesting and inspiring words, I think, tonight for you. First of all, some thank yous. Hamish, as always. Our thanks to you and your great staff. These guys are terrific. Having 6 books with you has been like family, and we appreciate it. What you all don't know, or maybe you don't, is that shoe clinics are all over New Zealand. And we've been making a tour all of the South Island. We just got off the ferry last night from 3 or 4 launches down there, and we're going to do the North Island. Starting tomorrow with Napier, and then Rotorua, and then Whakatane, and on it goes. But shoe clinics have been our host the whole way, and we really are grateful to them. We're also grateful to Canterbury University Press for publishing this wonderful book. Actually, 5 months ago, it was published first in the United States by Syracuse University Press. Has a wonderful reputation, yes, a wonderful reputation for sports literature. And they were all over Roger when they finally met him and published his book. However, Roger had to fight for a lot of New Zealand inclusion. And so when Canterbury University Press took on publishing it for a New Zealand edition, he could get the things, more things he wanted about New Zealand in the book. So some of you may even find your name if you're lucky enough in that book. The other thing, other people I want to thank, Unity. You guys have been with us the whole time too, so thank you very, very much for your help here in Wellington for all of these years. We really, really appreciate it. And we also want to thank a lot of you, all of you in fact, who have helped get the word out about this evening through yourself, your own social networks, through your clubs and various athletic associations. Thank you, we're grateful. I've said that Roger would like me to say a few words tonight, and I'm honored to do so. He asked me because I have a significant role in the advancement of women in running, and that participation has become a huge part of running history. Roger has dedicated a whole chapter in his book exclusively to this phenomenon, and so I would like to address myself to that tonight. I'm really honored to do it because Roger is an icon, and also he is a personal hero of mine. And at this point, with the other audiences, I want to say, full disclosure, we actually are married. The book is actually dedicated to me, and so if I show a positive bias for the book, you understand. Damn right, I show a positive bias for the book. However, I do know the difference between a 2:03 marathon and a 5:03 marathon, and this book is definitely a winner. And it is one of the best I have ever read, and certainly the best running book I have ever read. And I don't stand saying that alone. There are other famous writers that many of you runners and athletes have read. People like Amby Burfoot, Mel Wapman, Peter Lovesey, all of them have signed in by saying this is the best book of running they have ever read. Praise quotes have been coming in from around the world. Unsolicited as they are both gratifying and hilarious. So I would just like to read 2 of those to you right now with my new reading glasses, because I just had cataract surgery last week and I can't see a damn thing. All right. The first one is, this is one of the best sports books I've ever read. I refer to it constantly, but even better, it was a fantastic read. I couldn't put it down. History that's readable. What a concept. That's from Jason Beck, the curator of the British Columbia Sports Hall of Fame in Canada. And the other quote I wanted to read to you is, I may not have to read your book, Roger Robinson, because my husband keeps reading so many bits of it. Disgruntled runner, Ontario, Canada. We actually have a rule in our house. Roger finally put down his coffee one morning about after 3 years of marriage, and he said, "Kate, do me a big favor. Just you read your book, I will read my book. Do it, please." And the other praise quote, which is going to segue me into what I want to say tonight, is from the great Alison Rowe. And this is what she says on the back cover. "Roger's account of the global rise of women's running is the best I've ever seen. I'm honored that my win in the New York City Marathon and Lorraine Muller's in the Avon Marathon are central to his story." And what I would like to then talk about now is that Roger's dealing with the women's emergence in running is very significant because he knows it is nothing short of a social revolution. It's something you all have heard me talk about for a long, long time, but Roger explains why. He explores how women's running has grown so hugely and is so important. I mean, if you need some proof, actually, look around this room. 65% of the products in this room are for women. And that has happened in our lifetime. I'm looking around the room, it happened in our lifetime. That is an enormous trend. And Roger begins to tell the story of women's running long before a 20-year-old Kathrine Switzer pinned on bib number 261 and ran the Boston Marathon in 1967. It began long before that. But everybody knows the story of the girl who ran in that race, got attacked by the official who tried to throw her out and rip off that bib number and throw her out of the race because of the huge amount of photography and publicity that went around about it. It's become legendary, so legendary that people think that is actually the start of the women's running movement, and it is not. And Roger details that. And other thing that's important to know about that incident is that Roger doesn't write about it in his book. He doesn't write about it because he wasn't there. Roger's book is about an eyewitness account, he had to be there to see it, of events, important running events that have a larger significance in terms of history and evoke that era and the things that have happened since then. So the Boston Marathon story is not actually in the book. However, the reality is that Roger Robinson has had to live with the Boston Marathon story for 30 years, all right? And in that time, he talks about that incident as a spark that ignited a global empowerment movement. He knows it's not what happens to you that's important, it's what you do with it. And in this section, he also chronicles the grinding training it took women in that era to prove themselves as real legitimate athletes. The effort of constant legislation to get women official, and finally in distance running in 1972 in the United States, and how I created with Avon sponsorship a global series of 400 races in 27 countries that led to the inclusion of the women's marathon in the Olympic Games, and how the emergence of those women at the Olympic Games were on television, and the television coverage conveyed to the whole world women's capability. So that was very, very important. So he gets the bigger picture for us, and he does this again and again with many events. Women have contributed enormously to the sport in many, many ways. I'm just going to give you a few of them. Charity running, multi-billion-dollar change in our society was spearheaded and started by women. A whole new attitude of non-competitive running that is fun, joyful, people doing it together, travel together, and going for the experience and not necessarily how fast you can go was introduced by women. And of course, let's not forget the multi-billion-dollar fashion and clothing industry that women have spurred. I often say that when you're talking about genetic superiority in sports, women can outshot men any day of the week. And so it continues. I'd like to give you one other example, and then I'll bring Roger up here. But one other example is this silly bib number. Okay, well, it's not silly anymore. 261, suddenly, this is a bib number the official tried to pull off of me. is a number I ignored as 3 digits for 47 years. And suddenly, because of the internet, people began sending me pictures of themselves wearing this number on their back, when on their front, at Boston or New York City, they had number 24,392. But I'm wearing, they said, 261 on my back because it makes me feel fearless. And they kept using the word fearless. And I kept, why is this happening? And it's coming from all over the world. These people have no idea who each other are, why it was happening. And I just thought, isn't that nice? It's a kind of interesting synchronicity. Then they started sending me pictures of their tattoos. And if people are going to tattoo themselves with your PIN number, it really means something important. And I suddenly thought they're relating to the story of a girl running and being told she doesn't belong and she's not welcome. Because everybody has been told they don't belong and they're not welcome, or they're not cool, or they're not wealthy, or they're the wrong race, or the wrong color, or the wrong religion, wrong country, whatever it is. And then they go and run and they're fearless. And women especially are feeling this sense of transformation and this fearlessness just by putting one foot in front of the other. And you're looking at whole societies like Kenya, where the women have nothing and they have started to run, and because they're Kenyan, they're very good. They leave the country, they go out and they win races, they get a lot of prize money, they come back and they're sanitizing water and they're building schools, they're inoculating kids, they're changing the social fabric. And that's what's really happening now also with women's running. What we have done now is we've harnessed 261 and called it 261 Fearless. It's a nonprofit network, movement, charity. And around the world we're organizing clubs in little villages and in cities and in countries around the world where we're showing women how to take that first step. It's us as fearless women taking their hand and getting them to move. And the woman may be behind a burqa, or she may be in North Africa, but she's more than likely your next door neighbor. And we're knowing that this transformational process can change their lives in such a positive way. We're taking it out there in a major way. We're already, we're only 2.5 years old. We're already in 9 countries with, I what, 67 clubs already. I'm so excited. And I have a little sheet. Any women who are interested, I would really love you to sign up. We have a movement also doing very well in New Zealand. Are there any 261ers here tonight? Come on. They're all out training. Anyway, we would love you to join our movement and take part in this. And the last thing I want to talk about, by the way, 58% of all the runners in the United States are now women. 58% of all the runners are now women. Again, that's happened in our lifetime. It's a trend that's going globally. I'd love to know what the stat is in New Zealand. I don't know if anybody has any idea, but I bet it's close to 50-50. It certainly is more than that in Canada, and I think it's in France and Japan too. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is another thing that women's running has created, a social phenomenon, which is, in this era of social meanness, when social media means social meanness now, political mess and divisiveness, of Me Too, women and men running together has shown the world a wonderful example. It's like a beacon. It's a wonderful example of diversity, inclusion, equality. I often say that in my 60 years of running, I have never, ever encountered a man who gave me a hard time. Ever. That's way back in the 60s even. And all of us run together. We don't care what your gender is. We don't care what your income is. We don't care what your race is. We're supporting each other. We're hugging each other. And we're making the world a better place just by being together, especially in this particular era. And so all of you who do run, and I think just about everybody in this room, I would really like to say thank you very much for this really, really important part of showing the world a really great example. Thank you so much. Okay. Roger Robinson has been a great runner all his life and a great writer all his life. Back in his 20s in England, he ran for England in the World Cross Country Championships in an era when, that was Olympic standard. He immigrated to New Zealand, and 11 years later, he ran for New Zealand in the World Cross Country Championships. He's run and won many, many races. In his 40s, he hit full stride and started setting records in lots of races and just doing really, really brilliantly, but in particular setting records in Vancouver and in New York and in the Boston marathons. I often say at Boston, it's an irony in our household, that Roger Robinson's name is actually engraved in Copley Square at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, but mine is not. Okay? But it's wonderful to see. He did all this while being a full professor and writing about running also at the same time, whether he was working as a journalist or magazine writer or not a novelist, but writing books about it, but also as a television commentator, and everybody knows his voice as a stadium announcer at 2 Commonwealth Games and many other major events, and on television. He is so diverse and so talented, and has written over 20 books, and 7 of them on running, but as I say, I do truly believe that this is the best. So just let me set the scene before he comes up. I'd like you to imagine post-war England, a time of incredible deprivation, still, bomb sites, rationing. Roger was a little boy, and in 1948, they still only had 1 egg a week with 3 kids. They were poor, and he didn't have the money to go to an athletics meeting that was taking place near his home. So like a very clever 9-year-old boy would do, he wiggled his way through the hedge to go out on the track and watch these great runners go by. And he was totally smitten. It was his first experience with athletics. And from then on, he has been devoted to the sport, both as an observer, as a participant, and as an author. So if you'd welcome Roger Robinson.
Thank you all for coming. This is the best party we've been to for years. That's really great. It's a wonderful mix. I'll start with that. When I was 8 and I used to crawl through the hedge at Motsford Park, which was quite near our house. It was the London University athletic track. And I'd watch great athletes. I was particularly heroized Arthur Wint, who was a Jamaican 800-meter runner. I went out with my mother's tape measure and measured his stride from the marks he left in the cinders. And MacDonald Bailey was a sprinter. He was Trinidadian, but he ran for Great Britain in the Olympics. And in the first chapter of the book, I describe how I got taken by a neighbour who was a bit more affluent than us, and he had no children. So he kind of half adopted me and would take me to sports events. And he took me to the first day of the 1948 Olympics. And so in that chapter, I try and evoke what that was like for a 9-year-old who'd never been in a stadium that size before. And my literary colleagues, who are kind enough to have come tonight, may recognize that I was not exactly imitating, but drawing on about page 25 of James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. You know, the child's point of view, or some of Kathrine Mansfield's stories from the child's point of view. I tried to write in the language and the point of view of the child. And the book does that all the way through, so that by the end of the book, say, when I'm talking about the terrible bombings at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, I'm writing with the disillusionment of seeing, my sport devastated in this way, of a 75-year-old. So the book takes these different angles, and I'm writing from each particular point of view. Let me just give you one. 1974, first day of the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch, New Zealand. I was stadium announcer. The 10,000 metres is going to be between the world record holder Dave Bedford of England, who I'd been training with for a month or two beforehand, so I got to know him well, and the Kenyans. But round about the last mile of the race, of this 6-mile race, Taylor of New Zealand began to move up. And Bedford was struggling because the Kenyans had kind of harassed him, and he lost his confidence. And as stadium announcer, I try and explain this in the book. It's different from being a television commentator. On television, you can say, look at Taylor, he's closing up. You can be partisan, you can be dramatic, you can be excited. The stadium announcer has to be kind of impassive and impartial and say, still in first place is Juma of Kenya, and he's followed by Bedford of England and Black of England, and back in fourth is Taylor of New Zealand. You can't say how far. Because if you say how far, that's called giving assistance. That's giving information that you can't do because the athletes can hear. So anyway, that was the situation. Fortunately, the crowd took over, as I described in the book. And I say the crowd, 34,000 people, started the old all-black rugby incantation. I had to say that for the American readers who don't know. Black, 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 as Taylor closed up. And then with 2 laps to go, Bedford had dropped back, and now it's just the 3 of them. And the crowd was going black, black, black. And then I heard this sort of hesitation come into the chant as they began to realise that one of Taylor's rivals was called Black, and the other one, the Kenyan, was extremely black. And so I say it was like singers who'd forgotten the words. You know, they all kind of faded away. And then, just to give us a taste of how I try and handle these things, this is actually from the book. Now Taylor positioned himself threateningly on Dave Black's shoulder. Taylor! Taylor! Someone started up, a lone voice to the rescue. And in relief, 34,000 voices joined in and rose to ecstatic crescendo. Taylor! 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 They must have heard it on the sheep stations of the Canterbury Plains and in the foothills of the Southern Alps. The dream Day One script was enacted. Taylor from Timaru won the first track gold medal of the Games and cavorted like a gleeful kid on the finish line. So the book has a number of great races which I've been privileged enough to see. Zatopek in 1948, the great Cold War race between Kutz and Chataway in 1954, which I render in terms of the image of light and dark, because it was in complete darkness and the runners were followed by 2 almost worn out wartime searchlights that followed them around the track. And so they went in and out of these pools of light. And I take that as a metaphor for what we were seeing, which was the emergence of the possibility of light when Chataway in his all white won that race in an era of darkness and doubt. So the book is trying to do more than trying to describe races, but more than just describe races. I've been asked several times, and I'm slowly figuring out the answer. You know, what is this book about? And it's a hard one to answer because it's deliberately a complicated book. I wanted to get some serious ideas across, but I wanted to do them in ways that all my running mates could get, and it wasn't just for historians. You know, so I wanted to sort of tell stories and give my personal point of view. The best answer to that question now is it's actually 3 books in one. The first book is the book it started as, which was a history of the modern running movement. Kathrine has told you why that's important in our society. Something that can take 40,000 people and take over the city of New York and make that the day in the year which has less crime than any other day, and etc. That movement is important. It's not just a sport. So I started to write that book. Nobody's written that book, and this is now, especially with the timelines at the back, which I recommend to you, this is now the fullest history of that running movement which has yet been published. It's not the history that needs to be written. Somebody else needs to do that and use mine as kind of grassroots material. Because I decided I wanted to do other things as well as that. I wanted to say how running was so often more significant than just a sport. How when Kathrine and I were in New York in 2001, we were there on 9/11, how the marathon 8 weeks later did more than any other single thing to restore New York's self-confidence and give New York and America and the world, if you like, a sense of recovery, a sense of catharsis, an ability to grieve but also affirm and move forward. Or the track meet that was put on to the very great credit of Nick Willis, whose idea it was, and the Wellington officials, here in Wellington, 4 days after the Christchurch earthquake. Some of you were there, you remember how emotional that day was, and what it did for New Zealand to recover from that. And then, and one of the organisers is here tonight, the organisers of the International Track Meet in Christchurch, which was cancelled, of course, there in Christchurch because the whole track had been destroyed, they put on a meet a year later in Christchurch, in the city centre. Not out in the provinces, not in Ashburton or something, which would have been the obvious and safe thing to do. When Christchurch was still getting, 40 earthquakes a day above above 3.5 or something on the Richter scale. They put on an athletics meeting on Christ College ground on a 300-metre grass track. International meet. Nick Willis brought over his mates from America, and it was fabulous. And that was the first international sport that Christchurch had after the earthquake. That was more than just a sports book. That's basically what the book is saying. When, if you like, this aspect of the book started when Kathrine and I were invited to the Berlin Marathon in 1990. And that was the marathon 3 days before German reunification, and the first time that the marathon went through both parts of the city. Went through the Brandenburg Gate, went where the wall used to be, and I saw that that day was actually a much greater celebration than the night of reunification itself. And I realized there's something important going on here with my old sport. My old sport used to be just a few skinny blokes, you know, like me and Rod Sutherland, people like, just running around. Nobody took any notice of it, and suddenly there's millions of people doing it, women doing it, old people are doing it, and it's achieving all kinds of things for our society that we hadn't. Nobody's actually quite identified, and so this book is trying to identify. And the third aspect of the book, the third book there, is it's my observation. It's not my story. It's not my life story, because I, decided long ago not to write sex and violence novels. This is me as observer, as eyewitness, and because I realised that I've actually been there often, in some capacity or other. And as I said before, the capacities vary from a 9-year-old boy through to a youthful spectator, student from England, seeing Snell and Hallberg in that hour, and what I do with that chapter is say, and I don't think it's a stretch, that hour did a great deal. I won't say it did more than Gallipoli or more than, but it did a great deal to give New Zealand a sense of its own identity. They still played, I was there, I was from England, they still played God Save the Queen for Snell and for Hallberg. But even to me then, it sounded wrong. Because those two guys in their all black were not British. They were demonstrably not British, and we knew they were not British. And I didn't know at that point that I would ever come to New Zealand, but I realised even then that something was going on. And in that chapter I say that that was an era in which sport has helped not only New Zealand, but Morocco, and Kenya, and Ethiopia, and a number of other countries that have been, occupied or colonised, or in different ways, to emerge and become their own things. So that's what I was trying to do. And just a last way of giving you some glimpses into the book would be to, I found my page, very tedious. And the actors concerned always cry, and I'll try not to. But this is a way of giving you some peephole glimpses into the book. So yes, thanks on the title page to Canterbury University Press and Syracuse University Press, who welcomed this book and did a wonderful job of presentation. And Canterbury just so good to work with, so totally professional. Kathrine, who it's dedicated to, and who of course is a key figure in the chapter on women's running. I saw her Avon Marathon in London. I was in London on research. I read the paper, it's going to be this women's marathon, what's that? It was only the 6th women's marathon that had ever been run in the world, and I described how I joined up because Lorraine Muller was going to run, she was an old mate. And then I saw before the runners came through, this big double-decker red London bus came through, and I say in the book, I'm prepared to swear that I saw on the top of that bus, the race director with her flying hair and a blue jacket. And I'll swear by it. Actually, I was waiting for Lorraine, but anyway. So, Kathrine, thanks to you. Thanks to the people who contributed comments on the cover. Lloyd Jones is or was here, and I really appreciate a Booker finalist contributing a comment in support of a sports book, because it makes a statement that Lloyd and I both believe in, that there's no reason why sports writing shouldn't be good writing, and you know that from the Book of Fame. And Nick isn't here, Nick Willis contributed the main quote, but his dad Richard is, who deserves credit for getting Nick to write it. which took a while. Alan Stevens gave me access to his archive of what used to be New Zealand Amateur Athletic Association. So I was able to get the story of the beginnings of professionalism in running right for the first time. Nobody has told the full story before. Alan gave me the archives that enabled me to do that. Ross Jackson is quoted in the chapter on the environment when I talk about how runners pioneered the concept that is now called linear parks. We did it long before anybody had a posh name for it. We were just trespassing on the old railroad or around the golf course or something. But Ross gave me an expert quote about that and how it works and how it then becomes what he calls an ecological corridor. So thank you for that. Grant McLean was editing On the Run for the Scottish Harriers, or Wellington Scottish, sorry, and I pilfered a quote from Barry McGee that Grant had got in an interview when Barry talked about running the Rome Marathon in the dark and how he didn't know he was in third place and what an extraordinary surrealist thing it was to be running in the darkness there. So thank you, Grant. Thanks to the people who put out a book which was for me, a Festschrift called Running, Writing, Robinson, because that episode is described in the Christchurch earthquake chapter. And I vote just that, those of you who were there will remember the extraordinary, unforgettable mixed feelings of that night. When we were celebrating this surprise, wonderful publication, we were also mourning the fact that the Christchurch earthquake had happened the day before and my best running mate was killed, or probably killed, we didn't even know. So it was a really weird night and one that I tried to catch. So Harry Ricketts, Jeff Miles isn't here, but Harry Ricketts, David Carnegie, and David Norton, and Heidi Thompson is also involved in that book. Thank you for that, you're there. John Barrington appears in chapter 21 in the capacity of an older athlete who was coached by me. And he lectured best of it. Got a great result, third in the New York City Marathon, and a long-time friend. Rod Sutherland is referred to in the chapter on the environment when I talk about how running helps you to get to know the land. It becomes, you kind of take it into yourself if you run on it often. And he did that more than anybody because he used to be quarantine officer on Soames Island. And he ran round and round Soames Island 20 times a day. So I refer to that. Sometimes I did it with him. And he killed me because he could jump all the fences. Jeremy Commons is not only referred to briefly by name, but it's more that in the chapter that describes the 2012 New York City Marathon, the marathon that wasn't. The marathon that was cancelled because of Superstorm Sandy was a very strange week for me because I'd come back to Wellington for the funeral of David Carson Parker, who was an old friend who'd also been in New York with us just a bit after 9/11. So that chapter starts in that kind of muted terms of coming back for a funeral and then having to go back and trying to get back to a very different kind of tragedy in New York. There are so many running friends who are here that I can't possibly acknowledge all of them, but many have helped with this occasion, and all of you are part of my consciousness. So you all contributed. So it's got elements of memoir and elements of history and elements of narrative, as kind of experiment in narrative in many places. And people say, how long did it take you to write? And my answer to that is about 71 years. It starts when I was 8, and there's no other answer to that question. I've been working out, this is one claim I will end with, I've been working out some of the key ideas for it since I wrote a guest editorial for the New Zealand Listener in 1978. When I made some of the things that we've said more fully in this book and tonight, you know, running is more than just running. It was called the fun run phenomenon, and what does that mean? So I was actually very early to articulate that. And trying to give my own place, I say this in the book. I was not one of the great pioneers of the modern running movement, as Kathrine was, Arthur Lydiard say, Rudy Straub, who you read about in the book, and others. I was not one of the great pioneers, but I was often part of it. I won't go down in history except perhaps as the first to understand and to write that important history was being made. And that's what this book tries to say, and I thank you all for coming tonight and showing interest and showing me your friendship, which is very deeply valued. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony.